j'ouvre la réunion puisque nous avons le quorum.
I got a couple of things that need to be dealt with immediately. First is the request for a travel budget. I appreciate if somebody would move it and somebody second it, and hopefully there's no discussion about it because we need to be. Mr. May, move the budget. Any discussion? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'm assuming that we have passed that. All in favor, just to be technical? Yes, good. Yeah, that's right, okay. The second item of national crisis is that the coffee is terrible. If anyone wants to slip a note to the chair will undertake to get sufficient coffee for members to get through the next 2 hours. I tell you, have you got a chair? Have you got a chair? Wow. All right. With that, we welcome our guests this morning, our witnesses, and from the Canadian Forces Morale and Welfare Services, Lori Ogilvie, Senior Vice President, Military Family Services. Joining us from the Department of Veterans Affairs by video conference is Jane Hicks, Acting Director General, Service Delivery and Program Management. Steve Harris is here in person, and Melissa is not. Mark Roy is here in person. So with that, each of you have a 5-minute opening statement, one from the Canadian Forces Morale and one from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And who wishes to go first? Ms. Ogilvie.
Thank you. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, merci.
Good day, sir. Hello, I'm Laura Ogilvie, and I'm the head chair of services to the families of armed forces. This is a division of well-being and morale.
Services directly supports the Canadian Armed Forces operational readiness by contributing to and strengthening the mental, social, familial, physical, financial well-being of Canadian Armed Forces members, veterans, and their respective families. Core public funding is received for the delivery of services and programs deemed necessary by the Canadian Armed Forces. As the Canadian Armed Forces service delivery partner, we're responsive to them as they remain the functional authority. I'm going to start today by discussing the Soldier On program. It leverages the power of sport, recreation, and creative activities to support an individual's recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Established in 2007 and expanded in 2019 to align with the Canadian Armed Forces Transition Group, the Soldier On program supports military personnel and veterans who have sustained a physical and/or mental illness or injury while serving, whether attributable to service or not. Le programme sans limite.
The program has a number of sub-programs.
Increasing awareness and facilitating access to programs. Second is the local, regional, national, and international camps and events. Activities range from hockey, skiing, golf, and yoga to more creative programs such as cooking classes, guitar lessons, and woodworking. You might be familiar with the Invictus Games, which is the highest profile sporting event for ill and injured personnel. Sports, recreation, and creative activities help break down some of the barriers to recovery, and with the support of their peers, a common thread and a shared perseverance is established. Switching now to family-centric programs and services, most are delivered by us, the Canadian Forces Morale and Welfare Services, or through not-for-profit, provincially incorporated charitable organizations, namely Military Family Resource Centres. Today, programming is available in the areas of relocation preparedness, financial resilience, personal and familial health, and community involvement. A few examples include emergency family care assistance, mental health counseling in person and virtually, family and intimate partner violence support, including an annual Healthy Relationships promotional campaign, a 24/7 crisis and referral line, emergency grants and loans, children and youth mental health counseling, educational counseling, and non-clinical psychosocial supports, including the family version of Road to Mental Readiness. We also engage with national stakeholders to extend our capacity to offer services through a spousal employment network and virtual career fairs. telemedicine for relocating families, a pilot program to dispatch personnel support workers to a family's home, the Military Family Doctor Network, a dedicated crisis tech service with Kids Help Phone, and external partners and support through Seamless Canada. In 2017, we introduced the Veteran Family Program, which delivers services to medically releasing Canadian Armed Forces members, medically released veterans, and their families. A Veteran Family Program coordinator is available in every Canadian community to support the transition into post-service life. In 2022, we extended our telemedicine initiative to the veteran and family cohort. Also in 2022, Military Family Services formalized its support to transitioning families. Previously, a family liaison officer supported families of the ill and injured before and during the transition, and the Veteran Family Program coordinator supported post-release. A family transition advisor has now been added to the transition centers to support those families of non-medically releasing members. Beyond the services we provide, we work to ensure members, veterans, and their families have additional support accessing community and provincial systems of care to maintain their resilience in order to manage the transitions inherent to serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. Merci de votre temps, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you for your time, Chair and members, and I will be pleased to answer your questions. Un grand merci.
Or is it
Actually,
Mr.
Chair,
Harris?
it will
Okay.
be me. I'll
Okay.
deliver the remarks. So good morning and thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for inviting us to appear on transition. I'm Stephen Harris. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for Service Delivery, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Jane Hicks and Mark Roy. As you well know, transition is the process of change from military to post-service life. While every member will experience transition, the experience is not the same for every member. The successful transition to civilian life is dependent on many factors, including health, financial security, housing, community integration, identity, and employment or other purposeful activity. A large number of members are able to navigate this transition themselves or with minimal targeted assistance from available services and supports. However, others have unmet needs or risks that may require more intensive or ongoing supports. For veterans with more complex needs, our case managers work directly with veterans to identify their goals, needs, assessments, and a plan to achieve independence, health, and well-being. Both Veterans Affairs Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces are committed to supporting a seamless transition and improving outcomes for transitioning members. As a result, we've focused our efforts on reducing the complexity of the transition process and enhancing the well-being of Canadian Armed Forces members and RCMP members, veterans, and their families. Since 2015, Veterans Affairs and Canadian Armed Forces have been offering enhanced transition services to medically releasing members. This means we engage earlier with medically releasing members and their families to provide coordinated and integrated support. Early intervention is critical to a successful transition process. We've increased service to medically releasing members during their pre-release stage of transition. Although we've been working together to provide transition services for a considerable time, historically there was a potential gap for non-medically releasing members. In 2019, in cooperation with the Canadian Armed Forces, we designed a new joint military to civilian transition process for non-medically releasing members and their families. As part of this process, transitioning members are supported by both Canadian Armed Forces transition advisors and VAC staff who jointly provide assistance and planning. Following earlier trials, this new approach is being implemented nationally and will be fully operational as of March 2024. En outre, anciens combattants offrent une présence à temps plein ou à temps partiel dans les 32.
We offer full-time or part-time support in all the Canadian Armed Forces bases and wings across the country. In each of them, VAC offers transition planning services, including transition interviews and outreach and training seminars. During a transition interview, VAC staff provide releasing members with advice on applying for VAC programs and align members with supports based on their needs. Transition Centre staff conduct briefings on each base and face-to-face seminars with CAF members considering transition to provide important information on benefits and services provided by all our organizations. Enhanced transition training courses are also available online, and they're mandatory for all releasing members, and they cover a number of topics. In addition to these joint initiatives, VAC has a variety of other benefits and services in place to support releasing members with their transition. For example, the Veteran Family Program offers medically releasing CAF members and their families continued access to the Military Family Resource Centres and a suite of transition programs, courses, and group sessions. In this program, we've also introduced a pilot program called the Veteran Family Telemedicine Service, which connects medically released veterans and their families to a national network of Canadian licensed doctors, nurse practitioners, and healthcare providers who are accessible via video, audio, or secure text messaging. Overall, this program can help releasing members identify the right programs and services for their own specific needs. On the 1st of April 2022, VAC launched a new mental health program in which veterans that applied for certain mental health conditions automatically receive treatment benefits while their application is being processed.
Support for education and employment. The Education and Training Benefit provides funding for veterans to pursue education and training that will support them in a successful transition and position them to be more competitive in the civilian workforce. Career transition services help with career counseling, resume writing, and job search assistance. Our objective is to ensure a standardized, personalized, and professional transition approach that supports and empowers Canadian Armed Forces veterans and RCMP members, other veterans, their families before and during and after their transition to life after service. We're happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Mr. Harris. With that 6-minute round, Mr. Kelly, 6 minutes.
All right. Thanks to all of our witnesses today. I'd like to talk about the process for transferring family information and health documents when members are moved throughout Canada. This is an issue that's been identified before. Perhaps, I'm not sure who might be best to answer that. Do you want to go first, Mr. Harris?
So there are a couple of different ways that this might happen. When you're talking about members during their service transferring between different postings, that's the responsibility of the Canadian Armed Forces to make sure that their health information would follow it. When they release from the Canadian Armed Forces, then it becomes work between Veterans Affairs Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces to ensure that Veterans Affairs can access medical records where appropriate to be able to establish eligibility criteria or compensation that might be required for veterans.
Okay, how long would it normally take for members that are still in the forces and changing location to access health care in a new province when they've moved? I'll let you talk about that, and then talk about transition as well.
Sure. Once again, the Canadian Armed Forces would deliver healthcare services to members as they transition from one location geographically, provincially, or otherwise. That would be their responsibility. When a veteran leaves the service, how long would it take for them to access benefits and services? There's two streams. We have people who are still serving in the Canadian Armed Forces who apply for Veterans Affairs benefits. Things like pain and suffering compensation and others. And so about 25% of applications that we see for pain and suffering compensation come from still serving members of the Canadian Armed Forces. That means about 75% of them come after. So there are many that transition out of the military, realize that they may have had impacts to their health as a result of their military service, and may come back to us at Veterans Affairs a year later, 5 years later, even 25 years later, to see that they've had impacts from their service. And so at that time, we would go and get their medical records from the military to be able to assess and make the determination of a service relationship to the injury that they've suffered. That's easier in a digital age, but we still have a number of records that would still be in paper files. We have to be able to go and get them from wherever they're located within the Canadian Armed Forces or within national archives.
Okay, has there been improvement to the communication between National Defence and Veterans Affairs? We constantly hear of members who have sustained an injury, they transition out of the forces, and then have to be reassessed for the same injury that they have. And sometimes we're talking about pretty obvious injuries in some cases, things that one ought not to have to reprove over time. Has there been improvement in this?
The process is a little bit different, and so the Canadian Armed Forces assesses their active personnel as to their capacity to fulfill the role that they're in. With respect to when they've been determined that they would be required to medically release, in other words, they can no longer perform the duties necessary, they would leave. The assessment for Veterans Affairs programming may be different. We have to assess the service impact related to what it is. We have people who leave the Canadian Armed Forces for medical reasons, for reasons that are not actually related to their service. They may have sustained an injury or an illness outside of the confines of their service. And so that would be a determination that we need to make from a Veterans Affairs point of view to understand that there's a relationship between their service and the injuries that they've sustained.
All right, I'll maybe turn to Ms. Ogilvie. You've spoken in the past about the importance of identifying family supports as part of operational readiness. Can you describe that? Your remarks that are on the record were from quite a number of years ago. How is that going?
In 2020, we completely changed the family support program to recognize the challenges that families are currently facing, not what they were facing 25 years ago. So what we continually do is update the program to ensure that families are ready to be supported in any of the operational changes. So, for example, the introduction of telemedicine for relocating families was introduced to make sure that families don't have a break in medical access service when they're relocating to different provinces. A number of years ago, we were successfully able to negotiate with all provinces and territories to waive the 90-day wait period for families to access medical care when they move to a new province. So it's those type of things that we try, and many more examples, that we try to do to make sure that families are ready to support military members. During COVID, we found a number of different initiatives that we put in place, especially around spousal employment and access to mental health and childcare to be able to support.
So is there any research being done on this and
Yes.
how this impacts retention in the forces? So we've heard repeatedly that we know of the crisis of recruitment, crisis of retention, crisis of personnel. This has been identified by almost every witness that we've heard from within the department. If a family can't get a family doctor after they move, if a spouse of a serving personnel cannot access employment because of credential issues between provinces. These are all things that impact the career choice of a member. So do you have statistics or numbers or research on factors that contribute to people choosing to leave the forces?
Absolutely. So my organization, we conduct research annually, do a community needs assessment, and we also do research. Director General research analysis within the Canadian Armed Forces also conducts a quality of life survey every 3 years. That administration is just completed, so we will be getting the statistics to be able to then adjust our programming based on what this data is.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. If these documents are in format that could be tabled with the committee, that would be helpful. I'm sure Mr. Kelly and other members would be interested. Ms. O'Connell, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I wanted to start with you, Ms. Ogilvie, in terms of accessing health care. We have heard from previous witnesses during this study that, and I think it was quite eye-opening, the challenges just in the sense that CAF members don't access provincial health care systems and don't carry a health card. And so I could imagine significant challenges with that at any given time. So could you maybe speak to and you in the last round of questioning spoke to some of the changes or things that you've done to work with provinces and territories to help with this. But are there other gaps or other issues that we're still facing to allow for serving members and their families to actually be able to access health care or deal with some of the provincial territorial access issues?
So I will say that the biggest issue is actually access to physicians. So the Family Doctor Network that we established a number of years ago has very active participation by military families in that network. So what we introduced telemedicine during COVID because people couldn't access families. The Family Doctor Network is intended for in-person. Problem with that is if there's insufficient physicians in a particular province or community, there's going to be a gap in access to medical care. That is why telemedicine was also introduced, to be able to at least offset so that families aren't impacted if they need a referral to a specialist, or if a child is moving provinces and needs an assessment to go into the school system. So we're trying the best we can, but the biggest issue is access to medical doctors.
Thank you. And that information is helpful because eventually at the end of the study, we need to make recommendations. And so as much as I understand you're working hard on these issues, it's good for us to know where those gaps are, or what still remains as a gap. So don't hesitate to send additional information as well. And this question is actually for both, so feel free to jump in, whomever. I'm curious about operational stress injuries because it's not, when dealing with mental health, it's not like an injury, you break your arm on this date and exactly, when that injury happened, you move forward with the appropriate care. When it comes to things like operational stress injuries or other mental health needs, for some serving members or even veterans, they may not know the date the incident happened. If they've never suffered with mental health issues before, they may not even recognize within themselves what's happening, and therefore may not seek the care or wellness that they need. So why I'm asking both is, what in your respective roles are you kind of outlining? Here are some things to look for in education base, especially for those who've never experienced it before, how they recognize some of the signs, symptoms, and then seek help.
Maybe I'll just start briefly to say that, as part of the transition process, we have a lot of contact with veterans or Canadian Armed Forces going through the transition process with assessment tools to understand what they may be facing in terms of issues or concerns. Some of those are occupational stress injury issues. They may be other issues as well. So part of the interaction that we have and the early interaction that we have, both on the Canadian Armed Forces side and on the Veterans Affairs side, is to make sure that we can have proper assessments with those individuals and with members of their family. If they're seeing issues as well, we can often bring in members of families to sit with us as part of a transition interview. Secondly, what we do from an occupational stress injury point of view is we have clinics actually that are set up via Veterans Affairs, working with our provincial health counterparts in every area of the country and satellites in other areas as well, that help to support occupational stress injuries. And so they're dedicated clinics that veterans and RCMP members, veterans can access as well to be able to seek treatment for occupational stress injuries. We've also implemented a Center of Excellence on PTSD. It's called the Atlas Institute. It's developing both metrics and norms to be able to share with family physicians and others who may see veterans and military families, to be able to recognize some of these cues and signs and help to address them and treat them as part of that as well.
Do I have time for Ms. Ogilvie? Okay, Ms. Ogilvie, if you would like to add anything.
So within the Canadian Armed Forces, there's a psychoeducational program called Road to Mental Readiness. And Road to Mental Readiness is very similar to mental health first aid in that it educates all members on signs, symptoms, and helps seeking strategies for mental health. There's a parallel family program as well. We also, at all of the MFRCs across the country, have social workers that provide direct support to families and members if it's a familial situation. We also have virtual counseling, and then we also partner very closely with CIFMAP, which is the Canadian Armed Forces Member Assistance Program, that also offers psychosocial and counseling support for members.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay, I think I was done.
James, put your mic on mute. Okay. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. My computer froze up.
Okay. Something froze up, okay. Monsieur Desilets, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. But first, I would like to mention something that seems important for Francophones. I am on Veteran Affairs Committee, and 2 weeks ago we made a decision. We're doing a study on veteran women, and we have 23 meetings. And 2 weeks ago we made a decision not to call veteran women, but call them in French vétéranes instead of femme vétérane. It might not be an issue in English, but the French term vétérane is better for these people. So from now on, this is what we use in French, vétérane. It gives more respect to the role. And I'm talking about this because I'd like that within this committee, I would like that term to be used in French, vétéran. This recommendation comes from Ms. Sandra Perron, and we are happy to implement it within our committee and would love to have it implemented here and in different departments. My first question is for Mr. Harris. We all know that transition is a crucial moment for the individual, the man, the woman who has spent years within armed forces. This transition, and what we see with the Veteran Affairs Committee, is that it is a problem. And one of the elements we identified is that people with DND work in silo, just like people with veteran affairs. So there is hardly any communication, and that creates difficulties. And that also creates credibility issues with these two important departments. I would like to hear what you have to say with regards to what's being done in order to remove these silos so that people talk more. And the mic is yours, Mr. Smith. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chair. To first remark that the word vétéran in French is now being used, and thank you for saying this. I might ask Mr. Roy to answer your question. He is working right now to work with both departments to support veterans who are going through the transition process. Hello, everyone. Within all our transition centers, we worked with armed forces. We have employees who are on all bases and who create a transition center. It's a center where Canadian Armed Forces, veterans, families, we work all together to help members and families throughout their transition. So during that period, what do? We work hard to identify all the risks that a member could face that could affect the transition.
If in these cases we see that the impact is there, that the Canadian Armed Forces can help them today before the transition, we have a conversation with the members to help them, to try to help them directly before the transition. And in some cases, what happens is that we will work with the Canadian Armed Forces to extend the transition period. There can be an extension to the date where the member is retiring, if there's medical reasons to do so, whether the person is too ill to be able to do a transition. As Mr. Harris said previously, there's a series of questions we ask to members concerning all the risks. And we to identify all these risks, and then we work with the Canadian Armed Forces to mitigate these risks. Is it all members that go through this program of transition? Yes, we're trying have all members going through this program. It's a rather new program, so we're trying to all methods. It's not mandatory for the moment. It's on a voluntary basis. So in some cases, some members transition by themselves, but in most cases, we're trying to work with them. Can you tell me how it goes on the medical level? It's very difficult to follow up with the medical file, sometimes for very obscure reasons. Is there more follow-up with the medical file in the military? We're in a digital world. The medical files in the Canadian Armed Forces are completely digital. So there's an instantaneous and continuous follow-up. Does the veteran have access to the medical file when they become a veteran? Oh, yes, it depends. It depends on the level of services required. So if the person is released for non-medical reasons, they might not need the medical file. But in some cases, we will make sure that there's access to the medical file so we can transmit it to the services to support these former members. Thank you.
Madame Matson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you all for being here today. Ms. Ogilvie, I wanted to ask, the CFMWS workforce comprises a lot of military families within that. You said it's about 40%, is that correct? With what kind of positions do they fill for the military family positions?
All of the positions. So it can go from a clerk at Canex, which is our retail store, all the way up to an executive within the organization. So we through our military spousal employment network, we are one of the biggest employers within there because of the portability of positions. As families move from community to community, we have a footprint in every one of the communities, so it allows the military family members to port their pension and to port their tenure within the organization. So we have a preferential, but not preferential, but a preferred hiring practice for military families. Mm-hmm. So lifeguards in the pools all the way up to executives.
Okay. So in February, quite a few of those employees actually came to Parliament Hill and rallied outside of the Prime Minister's office because they were talking about those employment standards and the fact that they're being paid minimum wage. Can you speak to why, as an important part of that, they're not being paid a living wage?
So I can say that this year that everybody is being paid a living wage. We're going through a pay equity program right now to ensure that everybody is being paid appropriately. All staff of the non-public funds, that's through my organization, received a 6.8% pay increase this year to bring the salaries up to the level that is equivalent, is a living wage and is equivalent to other organizations. Now, I must say that the military family resource centers on each of the bases and wings are not employed by my organization. Those are not-for-profit, provincially incorporated organizations that are employed by, the employer of record is the board of directors, the volunteer board of directors of the organization. So we don't manage what their pay structures are.
Okay.
However, they also all received a 6.8% salary increase if that's what they would like to employ it.
And so if they switch provinces, because minimum wages are different,
yeah,
and that level is different, does it stay the same? Do they drop down? Is that consistent? Or do they maintain whatever the highest wage they had was? Or
it depends which province. So that's part of what the pay equity, I'm not an expert in this, but that's part of what the pay equity project that's ongoing right now is to make sure that all the positions are equitable across the country based on what the cost of living is in each of the community, as well as what the minimum wage standard are in each of the community.
But above that, okay. So the current postings that you have on your website will be changed to show that current when? To show that increase when?
Now. Yes.
Okay.
As of April 1st, that's when the increase was applied.
Okay. To Mr. Harris or Mr. Waugh. One of the issues that I got to sit briefly on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and one of the key issues that we were dealing with at the time was the contracting out of services for social workers, case workers for veterans dealing with a number of issues, and that transition is part of it. But having that consistent caseworker was so key to being able to help specific veterans go through potentially difficult transitions, difficult times, difficult points in that part of their lives. It's been now about 6 months since there was a $570 million contract to Loblaw awarded to Veterans Rehabilitation Services. And in fact, actually, some of the folks from the Renfrew County, medical health clinicians actually wrote an op-ed to the department based on the major problems of that contract. And they said, Veterans Affairs, its approach fails to understand the complexity of treating military-related trauma and demonstrates a universal lack of understandings of veterans' complex mental health challenges. It goes on to say that the PCVRS program appears to prioritize administrative processes over client care, being overly focused on timelines, rushing treatments, rather than understanding veterans' needs, or unique needs, and the importance of a culturally competent approach. They ended the letter saying, "We are not saving taxpayers' money, we are offering less and lining the pockets of a private company." So can you talk about what consultations occurred, and were those frontline service providers who are core to that service provision, were they consulted? What did they have to say at the time?
Yeah, unfortunately, you have about 10 seconds to answer that question.
You can do it in 10 seconds. That's great.
I was going to ask my colleague, Ms. Hicks, to answer, but in the interest of quick time, our providers were consulted, veterans were consulted, our staff were consulted. This is a continuation of what we're doing on a rehabilitation contract to ensure that we have the proper supports, professional supports in place to be able to help meet veterans' needs. And so that's the continuation there, and I hope I get a chance to offer some more as we go forward.
Thank you, Ms. Madison. Ms. Gallant, 5 minutes.
To the person who is most qualified to answer this question, Monday, a young veteran, father of 3, was buried, and after serving for decades, including stints in CSOR and JTF2, he was abandoned by CAF when he needed mental health care. Special Forces must adhere to their oaths of secrecy for life. Why are there no mental health provisions for JTF2 veterans to access necessary mental care without breaking the law?
So first and foremost, I'm very saddened by the case that you're raising here. I'm not aware of the particular implements of with restrictions for current JTF members to be able to access mental health benefits. We do have a process in place to shield JTF members' identity when they're going through and getting and accessing supports from Veterans Affairs benefits. So people should be able to, veterans should be able to, no matter what, be able to access supports from Veterans Affairs or from other organizations to be able to assure their support.
Previously, JTF2 veterans were unable to claim injury benefits because the circumstances surrounding their injuries could not be shared between the Defense Department and Veterans Affairs. Does the silo still exist for mental health between the two departments, or has the government just not bothered to hire enough clinical psychologists with required security clearances?
We continue to have people in place, clinical psychologists who are supporting veterans across all of aspects of their well-being and mental health. I'm happy to follow up with the specifics on JTF members with you.
Okay, so in a prior study, we heard that veteran spouses are ignored when they call the suicide hotline. They're told it's only for the members themselves. Has this situation changed?
That's not correct, and so if anybody's having that experience of calling our VAC assistance line available 24/7 and being told that it's not for them, it is for veterans, for family members, extended family as well. I'd like to have any examples of that so that I can get that corrected as well.
Okay.
Ms. Gallant, I should have said we're going to have to chop a minute off everybody, but you've still got 2.
Okay, so why are the doctors who determine the need to medically release a soldier not used in the medical pension calculations? For civilians, it's the family doctor who completes the medical portion of the insurance or disability claim form. Why can't the same people be completing them for the benefits for soldiers?
I'd have to defer you to our Canadian Armed Forces representatives to explain the role that the Canadian Armed Forces doctors have, which is not about medical assessment in terms of pension condition. We have doctors that are in place and medical advisory that is in place to help support that. Because what we do is we assess both the service relationship, which is important and which we're discussing here today, but also the actual impact, the severity of it. What does that mean from a limitation point of view for that individual over the course of their lifetime beyond their military service? So it's a bit of a different look at the injury, which may be sustained in service and maybe not.
Maybe it just requires a different form so that it can be at least be done, because they're short of doctors to begin with, and it takes so much of a doctor's time. If it's already being done once, why is there the duplication? What happens to a medical pension claim if a military doctor does not report a medical incident which occurs as a requirement of employment?
There's a benefit of doubt principle that's there. Even if it does not appear in a medical record from the Canadian Armed Forces, if there's a likelihood based on the description, based on the injury, that is the case, there's a benefit of doubt principle in our own legislation and in the way in which we pursue disability adjudication, so that if it seems likely that a member sustained a knee injury related to either repetitive trauma or a single trauma, even if it's not documented, I think as you would understand, members of the committee and Mr. Chair, not all injuries are reported in the Canadian Armed Forces for a number of reasons.
Okay, so the seamless medical care does not...
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. It's past 4 minutes. As you can see, colleagues, we're running the clock again. 4 minutes. Mr. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could turn to Ms. Ogilvie. First of all, thank you to you and your team for all that you do. Last week at Seamless Canada, we for you, Mr. Chair, we were out at CFB Gagetown, out in Fredericton for our annual Seamless Canada meeting. And Ms. Ogilvie and her team made it seamless in terms of the organization. And there was a great deal discussed on the day of the meeting. The day before, I was able to spend some time on the base speaking with CAF members of all ranks and heard some of the challenges, and healthcare kept coming up over and over and over again. And I know the theme for last week's meetings were childcare and spousal employment and the challenges associated with that. But I had to. It was important for me during that meeting to bring up the issues of healthcare, and we were very excited and proud of the fact that we were able to get the 90-day wait period for health cards wiped out across the country, and that was a big step. But the message I got on the base was, great, we got a piece of plastic, we can't use it. Can you speak to maybe some of the conversations that we had at Seamless, some of the provinces that came forward in that incredible discussion around healthcare and some of the things that they're hoping to be able to do at the provincial level?
Absolutely. Thank you. Again, I'll go back to the biggest challenge with healthcare right now is a lack of doctors in the communities, and more importantly, in the communities where military families are located. So in Fredericton specifically, around Gagetown, there is a lack of doctors, which is what is complicating access to medical care. So it was very encouraging at Seamless Canada, the discussions around what can the provinces and territories do to be able to increase interest in physicians being in particular communities and supporting Canadian Armed Forces families. So one of the pieces that, and I'll talk a little bit around it, but one of the pieces that is around the different pieces we're trying to do on educating family physicians on the unique needs of military families. So we have a family physician guide that has been created and is with the College of Family Physicians. So that the physicians themselves are getting education so that they understand the need for supporting military families. Wait lists is another concern around getting into family doctors. So some of the discussions that have happened at Seamless Canada and hope continue is around protecting certain portions of the physicians' spaces to be able to go to military families.
Yeah, and I think that one of the quick conversations. How much time do I have, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Chair.
40 seconds.
40 seconds. Very quickly, Mr. Chair, one of the conversations I had with one of the CAF members, it was actually our driver around the base, when she was posted, she was originally from Fredericton. When she was posted in Borden in Ontario, she kept her family doctor in Fredericton because she couldn't find one in Ontario to accept her, and whenever they had issues, they literally went back to Fredericton. This is a very common occurrence on base. This is known by CAF members. If you look at the Reddit lines and in terms of where good postings are for doctors and specific therapeutic care, I think we should really pay attention to working with the provinces to figure out ways to solve these issues.
Thank you, Mr. May. Certainly well worth noting. Monsieur Desilets, 1.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Ms. Hicks. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Ms. Hicks. Last Tuesday, yes, indeed. It's Friday now, yes. So the current committee, our committee, learned that the only recommendation that had actually taken form after the Arbour report was that consisting of changing the name of the Center for Sexual Offenses to, a nicer name. So what's your explanation of that? Why hasn't more been done?
C'est moi qui est mieux placé de répondre.
Allez-y.
Sure, go ahead. I certainly can't speak for the Canadian Armed Forces regarding the work on recommendations that have been made concerning their programming. What I can tell you from the point of view of FAC is that we are working with CAF and National Defence to work on all the recommendations. We are working to support veterans, women and men who sadly have been victimized by sexual assault, sexual misconduct, and we're working to ensure that everyone is able to access any support that they need, anything related to those recommendations. We want to help.
Just quickly, Ms. Ogilvie, you had mentioned that your website was entirely up to date. However, there is actually postings that are currently at minimum wage in Ontario, so I would hope that you would check that and make sure that that's addressed. Back to VAC with my other question in terms of that $570 million contract to Loblaws. One of the key points that they made in this article from the Brantford County folks was that there's an overall lack of program transparency, increased distress for veterans, duplication of interviews, the fact that many veterans, because of the frustrations that they feel already, and then it's increased, that they've actually walked away from service, and because of the money that's being referred and put online, put to these telemedicine opportunities and contracts, private contracts, they are unable to help clinicians who meet the standards for licensing, specifically with veterans service problems. Could you address that, please?
And here I might ask Jane to jump in for a short answer, please.
Certainly. There's significant effort that's happening right now to work with our partners in Canadian Veteran Rehab Services, PCVRS, to meet the needs of veterans. There's holistic assessments. It's a more integrated approach. We've been working with providers across the countries and case managers, and where we are aware of issues, we've been working closely with providers and contractors and clients to address those in a timely manner.
Thank you, Ms. Madsen. Ms. Crampton-Nyman, 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
okay.
this seamless medical care does not occur for families being posted, nor does it occur for families being transitioned. They can go through an entire 8-year posting at Petawawa and never get to the top of the doctor's waiting list. And the same goes when they're transferring out. So is it time for Canada to consider having military families, the spouses, treated on the base by the doctors who are already there?
Again, that would be a question that my Canadian Armed Forces colleagues would have to answer. We are looking to support, and Ms. Ogilvy's referenced the telemedicine pilot to be able to help support veterans or families, transitioning members, to be able to get access to at least temporary medical assistance and health in terms of having a family doctor from a call while they're waiting to get access through these provincial systems. We recognize that challenge, and we're working to help support it from a veteran point of view.
But telemedicine doesn't work when a child has a specific medical condition for which they need a specialist. And again, going all the way from Petawawa to Fredericton or Halifax every time a specialist is very taxing on a family. And we're trying to rebuild the Canadian Armed Forces. So these are exquisite times. Is it not time for a unique approach to taking care of the military families?
And I think actually that's the genesis of what Seamless Canada is really about. They're talking about it for certainly still serving members, but the application for veterans and those transitioning out of the military is equally there. I participate as part of the Seamless Canada working group as well, and I know our provincial colleagues are recognizing the fact that they need to try and help address these situations. Ones that you've just actually, Mr. Chair, that the members just raised specifically around wait lists for specialist appointments for families, for children, for others. This is a significant concern and has impacts for, as we've discussed previously, recruitment and retention, other issues. I'm not sure if Ms. Ogilvy wants to add.
I would also have to defer to the Canadian Armed Forces. It is, I will go back to my original point, is there is the same lack of doctors within the Canadian Armed Forces that there is in the general Canadian population.
Yeah,
so
yes, but
it's a lack of doctors.
Yeah, they're already there, though. And so for transitioning from one province to the next, how long does it take for the spouse and children to obtain provincial health care? I understand that it's only unique circumstances for which they will be granted an elimination of the 3-month waiting period.
That was one of the discussions that we had at Seamless Canada last week, was around families not having to be physically already relocated into the community before being able to apply for a health card. So the conversation we had was around, would provinces and territories be willing to waive that exception or provide that exception, so families knowing, let's say you're going from Gagetown to Borden, that you could, and you know in February you're being posted in June, you could apply for your
okay. So it's
health
posting
card.
time now.
Yes.
People are getting their marching orders and where they have to move. So this isn't in place yet, so it's going to be yet another year at least before these waiting periods can be waived for the families and children?
It's not a decision of the Canadian Armed Forces, it's a decision of the provinces and territories to do that. So that's, yes, the answer is yes. There still will be a wait to be able to get access to medical, to get your health card until you can go and say, this is my address in that particular community.
Thank you, Ms. Gallant. Ms. Lambropoulos, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking our witnesses for being here with us today to answer some more questions. I guess I'll apologize in advance if you guys have touched a little bit on this already, but I would like to get a bit of a deeper understanding, I guess, and to see if you have any recommendations on this specific issue. So we've heard in past committee meetings that some of the biggest issues are that a lot of veterans often don't necessarily have issues upon discharge, but they have issues come up later on, right? Because PTSD often shows up and creeps in later on, a few years later. It may not appear when they're discharged, when they have that caseworker specifically working with them on issues that they're currently dealing with. So they often report have more difficulty receiving the support that they need. I know that there is support offered to all veterans who ask for it. That's what we've heard. But it does appear that they don't always know that they can ask for this, or they don't always know who to reach out to, where to go to receive the support. Do you think that there is anything that the government, that we can recommend in this study that would help either continue that relationship with the veteran or make it so that there's an easier process in place for them to receive the help that they need?
If I may, maybe I'll start and I'd ask Ms. Hicks to join in to the answer after this. Look, there's no wrong time for a veteran to come forward to Veterans Affairs to seek benefits. We have programs that support people immediately upon their transition. We have programs that continue to support them through their progressive age and their changing needs, from rehabilitation or transition and supports in terms of education and career transition services, to supports in disability benefits, to supports in terms of income replacement, on and on. There's no wrong time, and we have people come to us at all ages, as you've noted, as the members noted, that may only discover that they have a disability, or they may have a barrier as a result of their service later on in their life or later on in their career. And so we need to do that. I think from the point of view of the question of what else can we do, we need to continue to promote the benefits and services that Veterans Affairs has available at the time of transition, at the time of serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, through the rest of their lifetime as well, to make sure that they're aware of those things. We do that work certainly now to try and make sure that people are aware of all the benefits and supports and services that are available. And we don't have a limitation. If there are people who have needs who come to us, there's not a cap at 100 veterans we can support at a time, or 1,000 or 10,000 veterans. As many who need help to come forward can get the assistance that they need. And so we want to continue to promote that. Maybe if I could just ask Ms. Hicks if she's got some additional elements here.
Just 2 points I wanted to raise is that we right now are investing significant efforts in the transition process to make sure that all veterans are aware of benefits and services when they release, that they sign up for MyVac accounts so we can push information out to them. But also we work with stakeholders and others to make sure that they are aware, so that if people come in touch with veterans who need assistance, they also know that they can refer them to us. So we're really focusing on awareness and education at all levels, kind of the regional, local, national level.
Thank you so much. I have one last question. We know that, well, at least we've felt and have heard that there are cultural changes that are taking place in national defense. And, the Arbor report, and just in general, there are a lot of changes being made so that gender is taken more into account. And so that women are treated with a certain amount of, that their needs are better met. And I'm wondering if this has also transferred on to Veterans Affairs, if you can comment on whether or not there is a gender-based analysis plus being put into the programs that are being offered, that analysis being used in the programs that are being offered, and whether or not you can tell me if there's anything specific being done for the women who have retired from the armed forces.
Ms. Lambropoulos has blown through her time, but having said that, maybe if you could just briefly respond.
The short answer is yes. There's a number of things that are being done within the department to help support women veterans. A number of years ago, we started the Office of Women Veterans and 2SLGBTQI+, to help assist and recognize some of the challenges that may be faced by women veterans in the community in terms of approaching and getting benefits from Veterans Affairs. We've made changes to our benefit structures, made changes to things like our table of disabilities when we look at adjudication to make sure there's equity and fairness in terms of what we're doing from that front. We've held a number of forums and do routine consultation with women veterans to make sure that we're hearing from them the challenges that they're facing and making adjustments on that front, and I'll perhaps leave it there.
Thank you, Ms. Lambropoulos. With that, it brings this first hour to a close. On behalf of the committee, I wanted to thank all of you for your patience for earlier in the week and returning here today. That was greatly appreciated. With that, colleagues, we'll suspend and then re-empanel. We have with us today virtually Dr. Ayla Azad, Chief Executive Officer, Canadian Chiropractic Association, Dr. Andrew Bennett from Cardis, joining us in the room, and Veterans Transition Network, Dr. Matthew McDaniel, Clinical Director, also joining us from video conference. We are already 7-8 minutes past where we should have been, so I'm going to ask you to be very tight on your 5-minute opening statements. And colleagues, we're already going to have to chop some time. Yes.
To that point, I don't want to waste more than about 15 seconds here, but doing witnesses in 2 panels like this contributes to our inability to get rounds of questions. I would ask that in future, let's run them together 2 hours straight. We don't lose the transition time.
Yeah, then we have to merge 6 people on the panel.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, that creates its own problems. Anyways, back to asking Ms. Dr. Ayla Azad for an opening 5-minute statement, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin by thanking the members of the Standing Committee on National Defence for inviting me on behalf of the Canadian Chiropractic Association and the 9,000 doctors of chiropractic across Canada we represent. I'm sorry I missed you in person on Tuesday, but happy to join you virtually this morning. I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Anishinaabe nations, and it is my honor and privilege to be here. It takes 8 years of education and 4,500 hours of clinical training to become a doctor of chiropractic. Chiropractors are trained to be primary care contact professionals with the ability to assess, diagnose, and treat spinal, muscle, nerve, and joint conditions, also known as musculoskeletal or MSK conditions. These conditions, such as back pain, headaches, neck pain, have a devastating impact on Canadians' health, quality of life, workforce participation, and the economy. According to the World Health Organization, MSK conditions, specifically low back pain, are the leading cause of disability around the globe, and more than 11 million Canadians suffer from musculoskeletal conditions every year. Due to the physical demands put on active military personnel, MSK conditions like back and neck pain are double that of the general population. MSK injuries are also a major occupational risk for a military career and are responsible for 42% of medical releases. And these conditions are a key issue for transition services, as 59% of Canadian Armed Forces veterans who report difficult adjustment to civilian life had chronic pain. We are all here today because we want to help our women and men in uniform stay healthy and pain-free. We feel chiropractors are part of the solution, but there are 2 barriers we want to bring to your attention. Barriers in access to care and inadequate benefits coverage. Yes, armed forces members do have access to some chiropractic care, but in order to receive treatment, they first need to get a referral from the on-base clinician. Most Canadians can simply walk into a chiropractor's office to get care. The requirement of a referral before accessing chiropractic care is not required in any provincial or national health regulation and is not best practice in the health insurance industry. Veterans and the RCMP can seek care when they are in pain without this requirement. There is well-documented research that patient-centered care includes choice of provider, and this results in improved outcomes. Some people respond well to physiotherapy, some people respond well to chiropractic, and some may need both. It seems disrespectful that our brave Canadian Armed Forces members don't have the same choice and require a referral. This requirement also takes time. It takes time to see a physician, and they take a history, they have to perform their own assessment, and then usually the patient is required to first try a course of treatment with on-base staff. And then when that doesn't work, they might get a referral to book an appointment with a chiropractor who then has to go through their own processes. This causes significant delay in accessing care. As a clinician and a chiropractor, I know the sooner I can see the patient, the shorter the recovery period, and the better the outcomes. When care is delayed, acute cases become more complex and potentially chronic. We hear stories of Canadian Armed Forces members waiting weeks to get the required referral, and many are paying out of pocket so they don't need to jump through these hoops. At a time when healthcare human resources are spread thin in the armed forces and across Canada, we need to streamline and reduce duplication. Secondly, the benefits offered through Medavie Blue Cross only cover 10 visits, which might be enough to cover an acute case of injury, but we know that MSK conditions like low back pain can reoccur, and there is a chronicity to them. Veterans, for example, get access to 20 visits. Our chiropractors are ready and willing to follow the protocols and reporting requirements that are necessary to interface with the armed forces, and we already have the training to do so. Culture change is hard and takes time, but we are asking for this committee to encourage the removal of the barriers that are preventing Canadian Armed Forces members from getting the care they need. The prevalence of MSK conditions among active service members means chiropractic can play a role in improving health outcomes and quality of life. We feel that the brave women and men of our armed forces deserve choice and the very best in healthcare. Thank you again for inviting me to appear before the committee.
Thank you. Dr. Bennett, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you and the committee members for the opportunity to appear before the Standing Committee this morning to speak about what I would see as an underexamined aspect of health and transition services provided to Canadian Armed Forces personnel and veterans, and that is their spiritual or pastoral care. While I am not a chaplain and have not provided pastoral care to veterans or armed forces personnel, as an ordained deacon in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, I regularly provide pastoral care and spiritual direction to men and women from a variety of backgrounds and situations. I'm also able to speak on these questions given my previous role as Canada's Ambassador for Religious Freedom and my ongoing work in this area. In the Christian tradition, as well as in the Jewish, Muslim, and certain other traditions, we understand that the human being has a tripartite nature, composed of a body, mind, and soul. Each part works in concert with the other two to ensure a healthy and thriving person. When the body is weakened by injury or disease, it can impact the psychological well-being of the person. Various forms of psychological distress and mental illness can have impacts on the physical body. Likewise, when a person is experiencing existential crises related to their search for meaning and truth, it can impact the physical and mental aspects of the person as well. We all confront in our lives certain existential questions, such as, who am I? Who am I in relationship to others? Who am I in relationship to the world? And who am I in relationship to God or to an ultimate truth according to a given philosophical tradition? The ongoing wrestling with these questions is part of our humanity. These questions often come particularly to the fore in times of personal crisis or in times when we place ourselves in harm's way, in conflict, as do the members of the Canadian Armed Forces on a daily basis. All of us are hardwired to seek meaning, to discover what is true, and then to govern our lives according to that truth. In short, we cannot separate out our rational and physical selves from our spiritual self. Given this reality, it is critical that in addition to services and treatment that support the physical and mental health of Canadian Armed Forces personnel and veterans, that they also be given access to high-quality care for their spiritual health. The skilled personnel of the Royal Canadian Chaplain Service are at the forefront of providing this care, as well as reflecting the religious diversity, the growing religious diversity of the armed forces. These men and women, both clerical and lay, collectively play an indispensable role in the ongoing spiritual health of our men and women in uniform and after they have left service. Pastoral care is also indispensable to aid in spiritual healing, healing that has beneficial outcomes for the whole person. In providing essential spiritual care to CAF personnel and veterans, chaplains must be able to provide that care and counsel fully informed by the teachings and beliefs of their particular faith. They must be fully able to exercise their freedom of religion in doing so, and thus minister to others in a way that is integrated and authentic, bearing faithful witness to what they confess to be true. This freedom must not be unduly hindered, such as through a mandated requirement to adhere to a prevailing secular creed or to conform to a political ideology of any stripe. These religious truths are timeless. The essential work of armed forces chaplains of all religious and philosophical traditions must be protected and encouraged, all the while upholding freedom of religion and conscience for chaplains and those whom they serve. As such, I'd like to recommend that this committee, in its report on this study, call upon the Minister of National Defence to firmly and publicly reject the discriminatory sections of Recommendation 6, redefining chaplaincy, contained in the April 25, 2022 final report of the Minister of National Defence's Advisory Panel on Systemic Racism and Discrimination. Further, this standing committee could recommend that all Canadians, regardless of their religious or philosophical tradition, whether that be theistic, secular humanist, atheistic, be supported through the pastoral services of CAF chaplains as they serve our country. I would also recommend the establishment of a permanent committee of religious leaders that reports jointly to the Minister of National Defence and to the Chaplain General on an annual basis regarding the integrity of the Royal Canadian Chaplain Service. Among its principal roles, the permanent committee would serve as a consultative body to ensure and promote ways of advancing and maintaining the religious diversity within the service, serve as an arm's-length representative body of religious leaders, and investigate and report on violations of the freedom of religion or conscience within the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Dr. McDaniel, final 5 minutes, please.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. My name is Dr. Matthew McDaniel, and I'm the Clinical Director at the Veterans Transition Network, or VTN. We are a registered charity that provides counseling and transition programs for veterans and service members of the Canadian Armed Forces across Canada. I have 20 years of experience working with people facing under-supported mental health disorders with a focus on frontline workers, first responders, and veterans. I see firsthand the cost of these groups falling through the cracks, and when that happens, the first responder or the veteran pays a heavy cost, and so does their family and their community, and this impact spreads across our society. My doctoral research centered on supporting these at-risk populations, and I joined VTN to address and try to mitigate systemic risk. I oversee our highly effective transition programming as we continue to expand services. We're attempting to reduce the rippling personal and societal impacts of impeded transition. The Veterans Transition Network was initially developed at the University of British Columbia in 1998 and refined over 15 years. We were established as a charity in 2012 in order to expand our services free of charge. And we offer specialized transition services for both men and women, English and French. Last year, 20% of our programs are in French and 40% were for women. My testimony will focus on recommendations for the in-house transition programming developed by the Canadian Armed Forces Transition Group. These recommendations are based on our years of experience helping veterans and service members resolve trauma, improve family relationships, and transition into civilian life. I have 3 major recommendations to make. The first is that transition services must be specialized. Research indicates that most veterans transition relatively successfully into civilian life. However, between 25 and 38% of veterans report difficulty transitioning, and this struggle is correlated with some specific service factors. These are medical release from the military, including release for mental health conditions, longer service history, service in the junior ranks, the regular forces, the Army, combat arms. And in addition, women veterans often struggle more significantly in their transition because of the high rate of military sexual trauma they experience. Women are a minority in the military, and this affects their service experience and transition. Women often experience something called sanctuary trauma. This is a traumatic injury from a person or institution that's believed to be safe. And this requires specialized programming to address. So if transition services are going to be successful, they must be built with the needs of these groups specifically in mind. Second recommendation is that transition services must be involved and proactive. One of our program founders, Dr. Marv Westwood, says you don't talk your way into PTSD and you can't talk your way out of it. And the same is true of military service and transition. Veterans did not talk their way into military service skills. They engaged with practical behavioral training, and they need the same as they transition into civilian life. Transition is not simply a change in employment. It's a deeply significant psychological and social process. And to help someone who is struggling with that process requires an involved approach. PowerPoint alone is not enough. Active skills rehearsal in a connected social environment is necessary. So for transition services to be valuable for those groups who need it most, it must involve a hands-on approach that includes active, socially situated skills rehearsal. And thirdly, transition services, transition needs social support. The common factor for all psychological treatments is social support. The relationship with the veteran's therapist is pivotal, and veteran relationships with the supportive people in their lives is also pivotal. When service members leave the military, they often leave behind their dominant social support network, and this hinders their ability to cope with transition challenges. Building social support outside the military community becomes crucial for successful transition, and group-based programs address this need by jumpstarting social support skills and connection outside of a military context. So a successful transition service must also incorporate components designed to enhance veteran social support. Thank you for your time and welcome your questions here.
Thank you, Dr. McDaniel. We have a 6-minute round, but I think in light of the time, we're going to have to make it a 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, witnesses, and Dr. McDaniel. One of the initiatives of your organization was to financially support Afghan interpreters. There were media reports that after your initiative wound down, the federal government was taking steps to reduce its support and reduce its relocation program. Is there a need for the federal government to reverse this decision and increase efforts to ensure the safety of these individuals?
You know, we are continuing to do that work. You know, despite maybe shift in the landscape around this, we are continuing to do that work, and we would love to continue doing that work. And any support that the government or other groups can give us in doing that would be fantastic.
You're to be commended for the work, to be sure. Would you not agree that there's really a responsibility of government to support this work and ensure that the work is undertaken, that we protect those that whose lives continue to be at risk for their support of Canadians?
I think that for all of the people in Canada that are making sacrifices for the country and the people involved with supporting Canada, we have a responsibility to be supporting all those groups, and you know that goes for our veterans as well as the folks that we're supporting around transition out of Afghanistan.
All right. During our last meeting on this study, the Veterans Ombudsman, Mr. Lick, said that in 2016 we released reports on 3 investigations, 1 on operational stress injuries in the primary reserves, 2 focusing on the process of transition from military to civilian life. These reports between them contained 8 recommendations, 7 of which were accepted by the minister. But none fully implemented. Is that, first of all, would you agree with that assessment? And do you want to comment on the importance of implementing recommendations of our ombudsman and also indeed from parliamentary committees that have also made recommendations to the government in support of veterans in transition?
Myself and a lot of people would love if all of those recommendations were fully followed through with. I'm aware that these things take time and sometimes there are complications involved. All I can say is that I'm in full support of us continuing to work on those recommendations.
These recommendations were made in 2016 and are not implemented. Is that does that concern you that 7 years after these recommendations were made, none are implemented?
I don't know if concern's the right word, but it certainly requires a lot of patience. And as I say, I'm in support of, even though that this much time has passed, that we continue working on those.
All right. Have I got any time left, Mr. Chair? The transition process, let's talk about that for CAF members. What are some of the things that your organization, what would you say on behalf of your organization are the most important or the major issues facing CAF members transitioning?
Yeah, we see 2 major, I would say, sort of categories of concerns in transitioning. The first has to do with the context and culture change between working with the armed forces and working with civilian populations. There are norms around communications, around presentation, and around sort of a mission-critical attitude that requires some assistance with communication skills and with presenting yourself, and the very skilled and knowledgeable people that exit our armed forces to a civilian population. I would call this kind of transition challenges. And then the second category that we see most often has to do with occupational stress injuries, mental health concerns, and physical health concerns that require ongoing support. And sometimes, in the case of something like PTSD, some targeted interventions that can help reduce the effects of those occupational stress injuries so that these folks are able to function better once they're released.
Okay, have you got a specific process fix that you'd like to get on the record as a potential recommendation from this committee?
Yeah, I think of the three recommendations I made, they're all quite important, but I think the one I really want to drive home is that transition services really do need to be integrated. They need to involve active skills rehearsal, and they need to involve social support. It can't just be some kind of online workshop. It can't just be some kind of PowerPoint situation. It needs to actually be much like entering the military with practical behavioral training in order to learn the skills to enter the military. They need practical behavioral training in order to transition out of the military.
Mr. Kelly. Mr. Souza, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Dr. Assad, you and I had a chance to speak last week, and I appreciated your comments and your delivery today. My questions are to Mr. McDaniel. I was really taken by your recommendations. I thought they were excellent. I really appreciated your notion of integrated care and proactive care. It's almost like as though you're advising us to take preventative measures in the use and in support of the transition. So the trends of mental health over the past year, are they consistent, or are they expanded in CAF and in the transition relative to the general population? And do you see that changing? Like, explain to us where we're at here.
It's really hard to address mental health concerns if society writ large does not acknowledge that those mental health concerns exist. And we have seen over the years more and more acknowledgement of some of the mental health challenges that not only people in the civilian population, but the military populations struggle with. The biggest example is PTSD, which used to be shell shock, which used to be nothing before that. And we are similarly seeing certain things now starting to be acknowledged so that we can actually help with them. I named something called sanctuary trauma. That's not something that I would bet most of the people here have heard as a term before. But it's quite apt for what some people experience with the military. The other thing that we're looking at much more now is moral injury, which has to do with when you participate in an action or behavior that goes against your ideals or your values or your deeply held beliefs about how life should be. And when something happens that contradicts those, a person goes through a whole identity crisis, and in fact, a crisis about whether or not they can live life in the same way anymore. You mentioned preventative care. If we can get in and address some of those mental health concerns I just named, PTSD, moral injury, sanctuary trauma, before they fester, we can prevent a whole tail of other challenges that happen, including relationship and family breakups, unemployment. Homelessness can be connected to a lack of preventative care in some situations. I think I'm kind of running with this answer, so I'm going to stop myself now.
Actually, I'm very interested in it because what you've identified are, it seems that there's more at-risk situations in CAF and in the transition than it is in the general population. For the reasons you mentioned, like you're talking about 25 to 30% cases.
Yeah.
How do you then manage that preventative or that proactive measure that your recommendation number 2? That's a big piece. How do you do that effectively?
I would love to see this integrated on a policy level where programs such as the ones that VTN offer are something that's available every time, including screenings, whether it's just for transition challenges or more occupational stress challenges, to make sure that we're hitting each member as they leave the service, rather than waiting until that member expresses distress at the point where more intense and expensive interventions are necessary.
Your number 2 actually helps you with regards to the social support and building of relationships, because people, I gather, to your sanctuary care, or the fact that they're feeling neglected or lost as a result of moving out of that network and support systems.
Mm-hmm. if all of us think about the things that make it easier for us to meet the challenges in our lives, I would bet that we are all thinking about the important people in our lives and how they make it okay for us to face those challenges. And similarly, armed forces members are going from a very socially integrated, tight community to a place where that's not guaranteed for them anymore. And we can do a lot of good by helping them, as I say, jumpstart that social connection in a non-military context.
Is a cultural change is happening now as a result? I you cited some of the women's issues. They're various. I mean, we're very concerned about what's happening to women veterans. Is that changing? Are you seeing a more positive outcome now, or an improvement?
I'm seeing an improvement. I think we're just getting started. As I say, society has to acknowledge something exists before we can take care of it, and we are now acknowledging that some of these challenges exist. And meetings like this are a sign that we're looking to take care of it.
Thank you very much. That's it for me, Chair.
Thank you, Monsieur Désiré. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 5 minutes, sir. Mr. Désiré? Am I on? Yes, you are. My questions are for you, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Dan McDaniel, rather, I'm sorry. Mental health. Can you keep the same psychologist if you go from the armed forces and transition out? Can you keep the same specialist in mental health?
Often a psychologist is employed by or contracted specifically by either the Canadian Forces or Veterans Affairs or privately. And there are opportunities in which you are able to continue. I have a private practice as well with a number of clients that I see transition from service to after service, but this is not the case for all members.
Merci.
Thank you. I was somewhat surprised and indeed struck by the figures you've cited. 25 to 38% of persons transitioning are having trouble, express that they have a lot of difficulty with the transition. Why is it even more difficult for women veterans to go through the transition period?
Yeah, so women represent a minority in the military. I was just, as you were talking, trying to look up the figure so that I could cite it here for the percentage of women versus other genders in the military, but they're in a minority. And minority populations face additional challenges. They have less social support, they have less normalization of their experience, and we have found that military sexual trauma especially affects women, and that is an added and very complicated and detrimental barrier to their transition and their lives, period. Yeah. And actually, may I just tag on there, because I did mention sanctuary trauma. So women are hoping that the military and the people in authority over them are safe, and they go in with that belief. And when that belief is shattered, that's an additional thing that needs to be addressed as they transition, if they're going to do so in the most successful way.
Merci. Est-ce que vous trouvez qu'au niveau justement des traumatismes en particulier...
Thank you. So sexual trauma affecting women veterans, do you think that the system documents this sufficiently?
Improvements in documenting this sufficiently.
OK. Pas suffisamment documenté, mais ça...
All right. Insufficiently documented, but the situation is improving. Thank you. Our system, how shall I put this? Why is it that we have difficulty really grasping what women are living in the armed forces? Because, you know, they've been really trying to be heard for 40 years. Why is it so difficult to understand what they're facing?
Continue to repeat this point, but mental health challenges and personal struggles cannot be addressed unless society acknowledges they exist. And our society has made great strides in acknowledging the challenges of minority populations and of women in the past years. And this cultural shift is affecting institutions like the armed forces. And I believe that is increasing our ability to acknowledge these things. In the past, society writ large, including society's institutions like the armed forces, have silenced behavior of this kind and people talking about the behavior of this kind. And I'm very glad that that is changing now.
Okay. Intéressant.
Thank you. Very interesting. I think this is highly optimistic on your part, and that's encouraging. Another matter, who is funding your organization?
A combination of funding through Veterans Affairs and private donors. It's a tapestry of different funders supporting us, and I'm very happy that we are able to have that funding. I think it's really important that our programs are free for the people that use them.
Et vous avez les revenus suffisants pour répondre.
And you have sufficient funding to fulfill your mandate and offer services?
Of how much we can do. The more funding that we receive, the more we are able to do. To date, we are serving around 100, maybe a little more than 100 veterans per year through our programs. The more funding that we're able to attain, the more we can do. In addition, we recently have received funding from a private donor to begin a couples program, a couples transition program. So I've mentioned that these challenges don't just affect the individual, they affect the couple, they affect the community and society at large. So that funding is allowing us to expand what we do to not just address the challenges within one person, but address the challenges that they experience with the people in their lives. Often the spouse of veterans that are transition are doing a lot of heavy lifting and helping them transition as well. So I'm very glad that additional funding is allowing us to address that challenge as well. And as we continue to grow, we're hoping to expand our programming.
Merci pour vos réponses claires et...
Thank you for these clear and concise answers.
Thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. Mr. McDaniel, I had referenced in the previous panel an opinion piece that has been presented by health clinicians from Renfrew County who are trying to provide services to Veterans Affairs Canada. One of the quotes from their article said, "The ability to care for psychologically injured veterans is a skill set that requires particular training and education and years of experience." And they were talking about in reference to that farming out, that privatization of a lot of these services. Of course, we've heard that from a lot of the caseworkers that work within Veterans Affairs. You spoke about that sanctuary trauma, the consistency that's required for those with that special skill set to be able to address that, to be able to handle that over time. Can you talk about the fact that if we're going to work within that consistency, if we're going to have someone that's able to delve into those cases, to have a consistency for a veteran that's dealing with a lot of psychological trauma, how that all works in together, and the importance that they can trust someone consistently and not have it farmed out in these ways to a company like Loblaw.
Yeah, one of the themes that I'm attempting to get across here is that these are not individual concerns, and that these are connected, that we are connected. And part of that connection involves that transition does need consistency, as you're talking about, or would benefit from consistency. I can't speak to the challenges of, well, I can speak, but I'm more explicitly going to say that whether support services for veterans are in-house or a public service or privatized, it has to be consistent so that they can rebuild trust, as you're kind of talking about. And even if it is privatized, that has to be woven into the fabric of public services. It can't be an independent entity. All of us need to be working together. I'm encouraged that you have a number of different helping people, support people on this panel right now, because we all need to be working together. The other members of the panel and myself need to be working together on this, whether we're private or public.
Okay. It's interesting that you had talked about sanctuary trauma. I hadn't heard that term before, so I'm hoping that makes that into this report as something that I guess has further funding or a specific focus on. I've often heard that a lot of the trauma that veterans have are actually, it's generational. They had a family member that had served. The trauma was carried into that family. They're looking for the children who then serve are looking for that same sanctuary. Can you talk about that a little bit more? And also, you spoke about women looking for that sanctuary more so, trusting in an institution that then doesn't represent them as a minority. Can you talk about and expand on how that would impact people who are gay from the LGBTQ2IS community? How would that impact them? Are there studies, are there numbers that we could use within that committee that you could bring forward?
Yeah, you've sort of brought up two different things, I think, here. The first has to do with intergenerational trauma. Yeah. And the second has to do with minority populations. To speak to intergenerational trauma, one of the largest correlates with mental health challenges and with the development of PTSD, rather than a person experiencing something as stressful or traumatic but having it convert into PTSD, has to do with a history of traumatic incidents in their lives. The more traumatic incidents you experience through your childhood and into adulthood, the more likely it is that you will develop PTSD. And that rolls forward too. If we don't manage to address those concerns, they can then be passed forward as that person who is facing some mental health challenges passes a bit of that on to their kids. And my second point to that is that most of the people in the professions that I work with, first responders, frontline workers, veterans, they do this because it's deeply meaningful to them, because they see this as service. They have found a way to give back to society and make their lives make sense from a service perspective. And because of that, they feel like they have found a family and they've found a group that accepts them and is on the same mission as they are on regarding this existential need to serve. So when that falls apart, when the institution falls apart, they also lose their sense of purpose in life. That's damaged as well. Both of these concerns, intergenerational trauma and kind of a loss of direction and meaning in life, can be addressed with preventative care if we get to these folks right away and keep this from going forward. I'm suggesting that our transition services aren't just affecting that 25 to 30% of people who have trouble with transitioning. This is preventing perhaps future generations from having these same challenges, and we need to take that very seriously.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there.
Second,
excuse me, Dr. McNally, we'll have to leave it there. 15 minutes and 25 minutes of questions. This isn't going to work. So 4 minutes each, starting with either Ms. Gallant or Ms. Kramp-Nyman. Ms. Kramp-Nyman, 4 minutes.
Thank you. Dr. Bennett, thank you for being here. My first question, for many, religion can play a very important source of morale for our Canadian Armed Forces that are being faced with combat. At this time, is the Department of National Defence doing enough to provide support and resources for the CAF? Is National Defence doing enough to provide support and resources for the CAF?
Well, I think, again, I would really hold up the work of the chaplaincy service. But that chaplaincy service needs to be broadened. It needs to reflect the greater religious diversity in the country. So I would certainly favor the expansion of that chaplaincy service to reflect different beliefs, different religious traditions.
So do you believe that the current resources we possess are at risk of being eroded or cut in the name of secularism?
I don't know if it's in the name of secularism, it's in the name of something. But I think certainly some of the recommendations that have come forward recently that I referenced in my remarks are problematic because they would effectively exclude from the chaplaincy service a large swath of religious traditions that maybe do not conform with particular views that are being advanced.
Okay, so in the past you've been interviewed stating that anti-Christian, anti-Muslim, anti-Catholic, and anti-Semitism are all on the rise. How has this progressed since 2021, and how do you believe this has impacted CAF?
I can't comment necessarily on how it's impacted the Canadian Armed Forces, but certainly in terms of society, StatsCan has demonstrated in its crime reporting survey that there have been increases in anti-religious hate crimes, particularly against Jews. Anti-Semitism continues to be a major problem in the country, and certainly a significant increase in anti-Catholic hate crimes. So that obviously can trickle down into different parts of society, but I think it's very important that we recognize that religion is something that is deeply important to a significant number of Canadians, and certainly that would be to a significant number of members of the armed forces, who, as Dr. McDaniel mentioned, often can suffer grave moral injury. And so they're trying to make sense of what is true, what do things mean, and they often need support to address those questions.
Okay, thank you. My next question. In January of 2022, the Minister of National Defence Advisory Panel on Systemic Racism and Discrimination released its final report. In it, they made 4 recommendations. A quick glance, though, at Annex E, you may be familiar with, of the report, appears to show that the panel, comprised of 4 individuals, only met with 2 different organizations with a religious focus, that of the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs and the Royal Canadian Chaplain Service. So my question is, do you believe that the panel did their due diligence when taking a look at the question of reforming the CAF chaplaincy?
No, they did not do their due diligence. They should have, I would say, I'd recommend that they should have consulted more religious leaders, certainly a broader range of religious traditions that are represented in the country, and they could have had maybe a bit of a broader view on the importance of the chaplaincy service and how it could be strengthened.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, question for you. Could you possibly describe how the religious supports could also be extended to family members or loved ones of those in the CAF?
I think, in terms of the role of chaplains, because of their pastoral care that they provide, it doesn't just sort of stop once you're outside the armed forces, or if you're not yourself an armed forces member, but you're part of an armed forces family. The chaplain or padre can play a major role, often when there is not easy access to other religious leaders when serving or when on base. And so I think ensuring that those chaplains are present, readily available, and have the resources they need to provide that care to families more broadly is really critical.
So could you elaborate what you feel is at risk if the CAF loses access to those religious supports?
Very briefly, please.
I think what is at risk is that you would marginalize significant portions of the Canadian population, and by extension the CAF population, who adhere to certain religious traditions that would effectively not be able to have chaplains were these recommendations to go forward.
Thank you, Ms. Crampton. And Mr. Fisher, 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and for sharing your testimony. Dr. McDaniel, transition is a incredibly complex process. It probably shouldn't be, but it seems to be. And it seems that the majority of the onus is put on the individual, the transitioning member, for that very, very complex process. I want to thank you. I was going to ask you what your recommendations were, but I want to thank you for clearly, with clarity, presenting those recommendations. And if you've got more that come out of this testimony, I would suggest it would be wonderful if you would submit those to us as well. On your website, the Veterans Transition Network website, they talk about the job market. They talk about when veterans are transitioning, they come out with a set of military skills, and then employers don't necessarily know how to how do we put those groups together? How do we get employers to recognize that special set of skills and how they can utilize those in today's employer? We have a major labor issue in Canada, and if there was a way of helping the veterans, but also helping employers see the value of those some of those military skill sets.
Yeah, it's a good question. My expertise has to do with psychological interventions. So my mind goes to what psychological interventions might we be able to do. And I would love it if included in the roster of services for transition was employment counseling quite directly, helping veterans. And this is, I'm not saying it's not available at all, but it's not available enough. Helping veterans be able to translate even just language on their CV to describe between a military culture and a civilian culture what they're capable of. And also helping them with the soft skills that perhaps people don't understand about teamwork and focus that you learn in the military. That's where my mind goes first, actually empowering the veteran with skills. My mind also goes to, is it not possible for us to be doing public campaigns that let the public know about this too, that show examples of successful employment transition between a military and a civilian context, because I'm sure there are some amazing success stories out there where people use the skills that the government gives folks in the civilian sector.
thank you for that. And as was all your testimony today, again, very clear and articulate on how to get to the goal. When we think about transitioning CAF member, military member has a cultural identity as being a military member of the Canadian military, and you talked about the psychological impacts. How and what are we doing to help with that transition from a psychological standpoint, and how could we perhaps do better?
Yeah, so there are services available. There are case managers. There are psychological support services available, of course, with VAC. What I'm advocating for here is that these services are made more specific, they're made more practical and skills-based, and they're made more social-based. And a word that has come up a couple times that I wish I included in my recommendations there because it's good is the word preventative. And as I've mentioned before, I think that involves, rather than waiting for folks to express distress or fall through the cracks, that we're on top of it before that, and that we're checking in with folks before that, and that these services are made regular and they're made available, and a transition is treated, as you say, as a complex and supported process that can prevent problems in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Desilets, 1 minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McDaniel, we often say and we often live the fact that armed forces live in silo with regards to veterans. And do you think that could have an impact on mental health?
Let me make sure that I understand the question. I think you're saying that the armed forces and veterans are, in a way, siloed away or maybe less connected with other aspects of society or other groups than would be positive. And I absolutely think that that is a challenge. In some ways it's necessary considering the intensity of skills and training and what we ask of them for them to end up quite cohesive within themselves. And I also think that what we're talking about is this challenge of how do you move from that cohesiveness, come apart, and rejoin with new groups within society, and how can we help them learn how to do that? And that it indeed could be benefited by finding ways to make sure that the armed forces are more connected with other aspects of our society before transition.
Merci. Vous parlez beaucoup de prévention. Pouvez-vous me donner des exemples?
You speak a lot about prevention. Can you provide us with concrete examples in terms of mental health? How can we prevent these horrible percentage of people who have problems with transition? How can we prevent this?
Question, and unfortunately, Mr. Desilets has left no time to answer it. I'm sure you'll be able to work it into another answer. Minute, Ms. Madison.
Mrs. Zudd, thank you so much for talking about a lot of the conditions that you see in terms of when medical release happens early and the issues. Can you, because I have such limited time, can you quickly discuss that link of chronic pain, how that links to mental health, but then also other systems around the world maybe that's dealing with this in a far better way to avoid that long-term injury, but also that long-term mental health issue?
Thank you so much. I've been fascinated by this conversation because, and Dr. McDaniel's comments, you cannot have mental health without physical health. And he put it correctly, we all need to be working together. So chronic pain and mental health directly connected. The 65% of people who have chronic pain will also have a mental health issue, and I believe the stats go both ways. As far as your comment about other models, I know we do things differently here, but around the world, if you look at just south of the border in the United States, they actually have integrated teams on bases. They have chiropractors on staff working together with professionals. We now know that interdisciplinary and integrated models of care is the best way to treat patients because we are not siloed. As someone put it, you can't have mental health but also and not think about all the other conditions that the patient may be going through. It must be a team-based,
Okay.
collaborative approach.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Ms. Gallant, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Deacon Bennett, I understand that the chaplaincy may be replaced with social workers. Does the Vatican ordain CAF social workers to give last rites?
No, it does not.
And what about the head of your church?
No, it does not. Unless they have a theological formation. You could have a social work background, but also have a theology degree, and so they could be ordained, but certainly not exclusively just a social work background.
Well, social workers must be in very high demand. They're even used instead of clinical psychologists for treating CAF. Dr. Azad, does clinical evidence exist to support the claim that chiropractic care can improve performance or heal a musculoskeletal injury, the type that soldiers sustain?
Absolutely. There's more and more evidence showing chiropractic care, manual therapy care, they call it multimodal care, is the best approach for many musculoskeletal conditions. And so, yes, there's guideline after guideline now that talks about musculoskeletal conditions and how manual therapy plays an incredibly important role in first line of care.
So I understand that massage therapy is not a covered benefit either. Do you have any idea why massage therapy and chiropractics are covered medical service once a person releases from the forces, but not during their service?
I can't comment on that. I don't know why that's in place. It would make sense that these things are covered. I think, what's happening in the Canadian Armed Forces, I feel like sometimes the Veterans Affairs are taking over some of the issues. If we could prevent, we've talked about prevention, if we can get in earlier and start preventative care for some of these military personnel, get to see them quickly, hopefully will prevent downstream issues.
Okay, so back to Deacon Bennett. The Prime Minister's culture wars have spread to the CAF, and now it appears to be discriminating against the three Abrahamic religions from the chaplaincy. Do you think that the obligation that you think that the CAF understands this issue, and that if the chaplains are not able to abide by the new CAF values, then CAF is not the place for them? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when someone is called to be a chaplain in the armed forces, or a chaplain anywhere for that matter, they're doing it fundamentally to serve the people that they minister to. And those people, especially CAF personnel, who have a deep religious faith, it could be a theistic faith, it could be an atheistic philosophy or another philosophy, they need to have access to those professional pastoral care workers, clerical or lay, who have an integrated, authentic faith. They want to be able to go to someone who believes what they believe, and they can have trust there. So that's critical. So we have to ensure in the chaplaincy service that the chaplains that are there can live out their faith fully, that they can express their faith fully so as to best serve those people that come to them seeking support, seeking maybe help in moral injury. Because if there isn't that trust that you believe what I believe, then it's hard for them to find, I think, the care that they would be looking for, because trust has to be a foundation for that.
But there's not a specific religion that deploys a chaplain with a specific religion all across the board for each time they go on a tour of duty.
Very briefly, please.
Could you clarify your question?
So you mentioned how that trust is important, but when a unit deploys, they can't have a chaplain from every religion. So
correct.
How does that work?
Well, I think the chaplain who's there has to be able to engage people of other faiths, but that doesn't mean that they drop their own faith. They have to be able to engage them from their faith tradition out of love, out of concern, and demonstrate genuine pastoral care.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Ms. O'Connell? Final 4 minutes?
Ms. Lambropoulos.
Okay.
It's what?
Madame Lambropoulos, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to begin by thanking all three of our witnesses on this panel. I think You've all brought forward a different perspective that we haven't heard from up until now, so thank you very much. Dr. McDaniel, I just want to start by saying that everything you said makes so much sense, and I'll definitely be looking towards your testimony when I'm putting forward my recommendations, because it seems obvious, but yet it's really not, right? And I'm wondering if you could just clarify what specific, I know you mentioned therapy where group therapy would help, because of course loneliness is one of the big issues, and feeling that support is definitely helpful. You also mentioned practicing social situations and scenarios. Would this be considered behavioral therapy? Like, what is the specific type of therapy that you think would benefit veterans?
Yeah. This is more integrated than behavioral therapy. It does involve behavioral components in that we are doing active skills rehearsal in a group context, allowing them to actually practice situations that they're going to encounter as they transition. But it's more than that. This also looks at their thoughts and their emotions while they're in these processes. And doing that in a group context really helps with that, because it's a lot easier to get feedback on yourself when you're in a group of people that you trust and you're able to ask them, how was that? I'm thinking this. Are you thinking that? This is what I'm feeling. What are you feeling? All around, this prepares them much better than if they were sitting and reading something about how to transition.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Deacon Bennett, I guess my question for you would be, I agree. I think that when someone is in a situation of crisis, they turn towards their faith and they begin a spiritual journey, perhaps. And I imagine that members in the armed forces are at a particular place and point in their lives where they may need this service and where they may need this guidance. We also know, though, that we're opening up and we're trying to be as inclusive as possible in the armed forces. There are members of different backgrounds. There are members, there's members of the LGBTQIS community. And obviously, everybody needs to be respectful, and we're moving towards a better culture in the armed forces. Given this context, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on how we can go forward, allowing, people and pastors and imams and rabbis of all, of all faiths, spiritual leaders of all faiths, to be involved while still maintaining that level of respect for all members of the CAF?
That at the core of all these different religious traditions, particularly the Abrahamic faith, there's an understanding of the inherency of human dignity. And so while a particular religious tradition might have a different view of anthropology or of sexuality, at the core, certainly of the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, the Islamic tradition, is an understanding of the dignity of the human person. And so while there might be differences of views on sexuality, anthropology, what have you, we're still called to recognize in the person with whom we might disagree their inherent dignity. And certainly chaplains have to be able to minister to them, recognizing that dignity. And so I think to say that, well, if you hold a particular view that's not in sync with a particular secular view, that you're not qualified to be a chaplain, is very narrow-minded and doesn't demonstrate the sort of robust pluralism and diversity that we should be really advancing within our society, and certainly within the CAF, where, given the reality of Canadian Armed Forces personnel and what they deal with, they need to be able to have access to authentic, integrated pastoral care.
Thank you, Ms. Lambropoulos, and that does bring to an end our session. I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank our three witnesses and apologize again for having to bump you from Tuesday to Friday, but such is the life of parliamentarians. Colleagues, if you could just stay for a second, I got three things I need to deal with quickly. One, the budget, which has already been distributed for the health services. I need someone to move it, and I saw Ms. O'Connell twitch, so she's moved it. Mr. May seconded it. Any conversation? This is the $5,100 for the. All agree? Good. Thank you. Second of all, Ms. Matheson has put forward a motion. I intend to deal with that on Tuesday. Third, the draft report on cyber is going to be, is already available?
Yes.
Yes, it's already been distributed. I want to deal with that on Tuesday, okay? And do you want to speak to that particular issue?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering. That report took a long time. Was it handed into the chair and then returned to the analysts for correction already, or
I haven't seen it.
was it just handed out to everybody at the same time?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And then a week today, intend to start the procurement study, Lord willing, and whips. By the way, speaking of whips and House leadership, if you can lean on anyone you can lean on, because our travel budget may have been passed, that doesn't mean we're going anywhere, just means it's passed. And so we need to free up the attitudes towards travel. And finally, I'd like us all to recommend my staff member for barista training. So, there we go. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.